Historical Reconstruction of Aryan X.
Episode 63. The Importance of Letters. Among the intellectuals of the world, especially those who research or major in languages, if anyone has encountered Mandarin, Taiwanese, or Cantonese, which are the languages of current China, it is normal for them to harbor one serious doubt. However, I carefully point out that there is a serious problem with the intellectual level of people around the world, to the extent that no one, except for the single person Aryan X, has raised this issue until now. I will point out again what exactly that problem was. 1. The Tower of Babel. Aryan X is not a Christian who believes in a creator who created the omnipotent earth. Of course, no one has seen such an omnipotent God, nor has anyone proven such an existence. There is no such omnipotent God or existence. There are only those who brag that such an omnipotent existence exists. Now let's find the root of how language was fabricated. I quote Wikipedia regarding the Bible of Christians. The Tower of Babel is a tower recorded in the Old Testament having been built by the people of ancient Babylonia. The story is told in Genesis chapter 11. This story deals with the themes of humanity using a single language and the resulting corruption and tragedy. The Eridu Genesis, the Sumerian flood myth, contains passages about the unity of human language before the intervention of the gods. Part of the Eridu Genesis was found in the library of Ashurbanipal of the Neo-Assyrian Empire discovered in Nineveh. The fact that the library of Ashurbanipal was interested in preserving old traditions is considered to suggest that these stories about language confusion and divine intervention were still valid during this period. The book called the Christian Bible quotes the uniformity of human language, that is, that the primordial language was one. Of course, the event where human language specialized into the languages of each region will be described later, but there was no event like the Tower of Babel in human history. First, let's examine the meaning of Babel and the Tower of Babel. The Ba in the Tower of Babel is a pure Korean word meaning bright, found in names like Barcelona, Warsaw, and the Vatican. Bel is also a word meaning bright, identical to Belgium, Belarus, and Belize. The Tower of Babel is a pure Korean word meaning bright, bright tower. Could it be that the mother tongue, the root of all languages in the world, is Korean? Because, as I will continue to mention, the names of countries and all place names around the world, as well as historical languages and contents, are all connected to ancient or current Korean. 2. The importance of letters. Are the Hanja, Chinese characters, that current China claims as their own truly their letters? Or who were the real protagonists, people of another country who created and used those Hanja, Chinese characters? I will reveal their identity first. In historical issues, the role of Hanja, Chinese characters, is significantly important. Due to these characters, all history fabrication could turn into bubbles. Let's examine what this means. Origin of the name Hanja, Chinese characters. Then why were they called Hanja? It is because the place where these letters were made was the Han dynasty/region. But a truly funny fact is that the Korean language is called Hangeul. At this time, the Han uses the character Han, Korea. However, the fact is that the region called Han dynasty region, where Hanja was made, and Han, Korea, of Hangeul, the Korean language, are the same region in the same location. Korean Hangeul and Hanja, Chinese characters. Current China is noted as Junguk, Middle Kingdom. Of course, the location of current China is not in the middle of the earth but biased towards the east of Asia. Central Asia is the very Junguk, Middle Kingdom, in history. Spoken Korean is called Hunmin Jungum, correct sounds for the instruction of the people. In other words, it was called correct sounds, not letters. Hanja, Chinese characters, are the Ja letters of the place called Han dynasty/region. Seoul, the capital of Korea, is also called Hanyang, sunny side of the Han. The Han here is also the Han region of Hanja. In the preface explaining why Hunminjeongeum, the Korean spoken Korean, was made, there is a text, because the language of the nation is different from Jungkook, Middle Kingdom, and does not communicate with each other, I create Hangeul. Is the Jungkook mentioned here really current China, or is it a different existence? According to the meaning behind the creation of the current Korean script, Hangeul, it says that because the language and sounds of Jungkook, China on the current continent, and Korea on the Korean peninsula were different, the people of the Korean peninsula felt inconvenienced, so they created the Korean script, Hangeul. Geez, isn't this telling a funny story? This is identical to saying that the citizens of the USA made a language because they were afraid they would be uncomfortable since their language is different from Mexico, the neighboring country. It is truly laughable. The truth begins from the fact that the actual Jungkook, Middle Kingdom, in history was not the fabricated China of the current continent. Finding this actual Jungkook, Middle Kingdom, in history is also the process of restoring history. The Jungkook that became the background for creating spoken Korean must have been within the same territory as the Koreans, living together, rubbing skin, and mixing words for it to make sense. That Jungkook, Middle Kingdom, in history was precisely Central Asia. Then which came first, Hangeul, the letters of Korea, or Hanja? The reason I'm weighing this is to show you the core problem of language. Civilized countries around the world have their own letters that mark pronunciation and phonemes. In other words, if there are no letters to mark the pronunciation and phonemes for reading Hanja, the truth is that without separate letters to mark the pronunciation and phonemes for reading Hanja, one can absolutely not use Hanja. Hanja are ideograms, that is, they are characters that briefly express meaning and intent. If Hanja is spoken only as a sound without being written on the surface, the exact meaning cannot be conveyed to the other party. It has the characteristic that the exact meaning can only be conveyed when written as letters on the surface. Of course, this is limited to cases where one has learned the meaning and form of the character.
Spoken Korean can naturally convey meaning and intent to the other party through sound or writing alone. In other words, the characters called Hanja cannot emerge in the midst of a language that lacks inherent meaning or intent. It is the act of fixing the meaning and form of the existing language's meaning and intent into a single character called Hanja. Hanja is what fixed the meaning and intent of spoken Korean into a single character briefly after spoken Korean emerged. A disadvantage of current spoken Korean is that there are many words with different meanings but similar pronunciations, so there may be problems with the accuracy of meaning when only these pronunciations are written. However, since Hanja has only one meaning when written on the surface, it can be interpreted accurately, so it can be used extensively in the emperor's imperial orders and documents. However, the problem we must think deeply about is that I said Korean is the primordial language of humanity related to national names and place names around the world. Hanja, the characters that fix the meaning of Korean into one character, appeared after the Korean language emerged. Then, can one teach Hanja, which are ideograms, without using Hangeul, the native script that marks the meaning and pronunciation of Korean? It is impossible. This is precisely the hole in history fabrication. I said the pyramids of the Pyramid civilization around 10,000 BC are a Korean word. And I said the Upanishads, the scriptures created at that time, are also Korean. Sanskrit, the mother tongue of current European languages known as an Indian language, is precisely Korean. Why do you try to deceive the people with a problem that will be discovered at any time? How many countries in the world truly do not have their own letters to display pronunciation and sound phonemes? Do you know what the characteristics of the national names and place names of Korea, China, Japan, and Taiwan are? They all have the characteristic of using Hanja, speech and writing. What if there is speech but no writing? And what if there is writing but no speech? Have you ever thought about this? The basics for composing the most fundamental units, family, society, nation, and the world, are speech and writing. In other words, without speech and writing, society cannot be maintained primarily and history itself cannot exist. Hanja, Chinese characters, If you have ever thought with interest even once about the fact that Chinese people mark the phonemes, the pronunciation of Hanja, which is said to be the language of current China, using the English alphabet instead of their own native letters, then you are an awakened person. However, if you saw that and were completely unaware or did not recognize, please keep in mind that there is a problem with your intellectual level. For the ideograms called Hanja, if there are no separate native letters to mark the phonemes, which are the pronunciation of the characters, those Hanja cannot be controlled. If you don't know what Aryan X is talking about, run to a bookstore and look for a textbook on Hanja, which is said to be the language of current China, and you will find the answer immediately. Current China does not have its own letters to mark the pronunciation and phonemes of Hanja, and it uses the English alphabet for marking all Hanja pronunciations. Then, before the 1950s and 1960s, before they used the English alphabet to mark the pronunciation and phonemes of Hanja, with what letters did they mark the pronunciation and phonemes of Hanja to teach the people? The fact that the protagonists of the 25 histories of Junguksa, the history of the world that was in Central Asia, were not current China, but the Koreans, the subjects who created the national names and place names of the world, can be verified with this one single thing: the letters that mark the pronunciation and phonemes of Hanja that recorded history. This is true proficiency. China is not the protagonist of history, but merely the subject who stole history. In the next episode, I will reveal the pyramid civilization of Sudan, Africa. Please refer to the attached blog for details regarding the YouTube video release schedule and titles, as well as the title and table of contents of the prepared book. https://blog.naver.com/GokimGarcia